Siya Kolisi, he's in shape. The talk that he was overweight, I think it was a disillusioned president who was angry that Racing got knocked out of the top 14. Zels, no surprises that Rassie's made him the captain, says he will start, and has kind of dismissed any belief among observers, spectators, media, that Siya Kolisi's position was ever going to be in doubt.
No surprise at all. Glad that he's going to be back in the mix and that he's ready to go. If Rassie's ready to pick him, then he must be ready. So that's good news for South Africa. Not such great news for Ireland.
All right. He's picked 39 players, Scotty. 14 standby and 8 are injured. That's 61 players. If you're not in the 61 now, could be curtains for the next 4 years.
Hey, considering you got 2 matches in an 8-day turnaround, I mean, it's like a mini tour, isn't it? I mean, unfortunately, we haven't got the best of 3 series. So for both sides to be heavily laden with 35 plus, ancillary players, I still think that common sense will prevail, and there'll be a solid spine of 25 to 28 players that will obviously get game time over the ensuing 2 weeks.
All right, Zels, when you look at the squad and the comments that Rassie's made, Jan-Hendrik Wessels, he's loved him since he was under 15. He's always seen him as a prop, not as a hooker.
Yes.
Jake sees him as a hooker,
yes,
thinking that the prop stocks are so loaded. He hasn't really come through as a hooker. He only played 10 games this season for the Bulls, but he is one of their project players, as they call it. Where do you see him finally settling?
That is a great question. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Look, anybody can play hooker for South Africa, apparently. You don't actually have to be a hooker, so potentially Jan Hendrik could play both. I'd like to see him go at loose head because for me, he's a guy who likes to carry the ball. He likes to be front and center in the ball carry department and maybe not sort of wasted on the edge waiting for the ball to come his way. So I think loose head could be a great position for him. It keeps him in the mix in the set piece, but maybe doesn't put that line-out pressure on him and accentuates his ball-carrying ability.
Scotty, I don't know how much you've seen of him, the Bulls hooker.
I know nothing of him. Unfortunately, sorry, no comment on that. So certainly when it comes to the front 5, I'm the most least experienced person to,
all right, well,
to offer some insight. Hey, listen, this next cycle is all about creating and developing and retaining and optimizing depth. Certainly in the front 5. As everybody gets a little bit longer in the tooth, as they say, into this next World Cup cycle. So it's still an embarrassment of riches. There's a lot of great talent around. Just needs to be harnessed into what Rassie and the Bok way is all about.
If we take Ireland, consistently been the best team in the world pre the World Cup, great results, went down to New Zealand, lost to the Maori in the first game, lost the first test at Eden Park, coincidentally when Fozzie wasn't there, and then came back and won 3 on the trot, won the second test, beat the Maori, and then won the decider and won it quite well. This is probably the greatest Irish team we've seen in professional rugby come in here. Will we see changes, or will we see the Boks go back to what they know just to get the series win, given they've only played them twice in the last 6 years and they've lost both times? Yeah,
the last win was 2016. I think to contextualize it all, 5 years under Farrell's tenure, 17 unbeaten test matches leading up to the World Cup, that epic 13-8 victory for Ireland that obviously caused some consternation, and there was some, bite about the post-match nuptials, as they say. So, this next 2 weeks really will shape both not only the future of South Africa and Rassie's appetite going forward, but also kind of Farrell's tenure. I mean, it's 48 games, 39 wins, 81% win record. They're averaging 30 points carried interest going forward. They're stingy on defence. And of course, if you look beyond this next cycle, this next year, Farrell takes a little sabbatical, 18 months looking towards the Lions in 25. There's an emerging island coming to Africa now in October. They need to find continuity and consistency in key messaging. Who is going to be the leader when Farrell is not there? Okay, business as usual now. The next 2 weeks really is going to be pivotal for Farrell, because Zelly and I talked off show. Is this formula, the formulaic way that Ireland play, which clearly has the strongest fundamentals in world rugby. 1 and 2 in the rankings. Have they hit a ceiling? You know, with this constant 4-man overlay play that is just, for me, so thirsty on energy, when I think conventional wisdom lets me to believe you need to pare it back and, you know, the path of least resistance, and create a different paradigm shift for Ireland. So I that'll be interesting to see, for me, to see how this plays out, because when you lose your kind of key talisman, your Mr. Tempo, perpetual motion in Jamison Gibson Park, injured with a hamstring injury, that 9 and 10 axis continuity is crucial to exactly what's been good about Ireland over the last 4 years.
But if you take Sexton's now retired and they haven't replacing it. Crowley's had a very good season for Munster.
Yeah.
Conor Murray is really at the tail end of his career, and he's a very different dimensional player to Gibson Park. And their whole game has been based on quick tempo, quick ball, and that's not going to be there, which really suits a Bok defence that prides itself on up and in your face at Loftus Versfeld. How effective will they be trying to play a kicking game as a default in terms of Conor Murray?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really have a lot of insight into exactly where Ireland are going with their selections, but Craig Casey for me is a guy who I think is quite an interesting young player, combative guy, all action, a lot of energy. Conor Murray's 35 years old now. I don't know whether he's going to be the guy that starts at 9 with Jamison Gibson Park out. So I don't really know, where they stand in the kicking game, and maybe there's questions there that they need answered. I just feel like Ireland, like anything in rugby, is cyclical, right? The Lions that would bait teams into the coast-to-coast rugby and then take advantage of the Highveld factor and basically outrun teams. Eventually, guys came around to how that works, and the Leinster blueprint is magnificent. The all sort of tempo, keep ball approach. But people have seen it for years now.
Well, that's it, Zelly. I think when your mindset is about not only just existing and thriving in repetition when it comes to hitting your recyclables, 10 rucks, 15 rucks, 20 rucks. But if the outcome is not a 3-on-2 which creates an overlap, and you score in the corner, it is a useless waste of energy and resource. And I don't think there's going to be a radical shift from Ireland, because personnel do change, and whilst it's still stay on message, I think against the Boks you need to have a contingency, as we saw last week in Loftus with the Warriors. Is that you got to create pressure, you got to put pulses out there, and I would be conscious about targeting that inherent disconnect between 9 and 10, just because they haven't had international experience and reps together, and also the outside centre position. Just because we don't know whether that is Ringrose coming back or Osborne gets another shift. So it is interesting, because in the evolution of rugby coaching, adapt or die. You got to be able to play the conditions.
All right, but now Farrell has said this is part of the adventure. He's taken a similar approach to when they went to New Zealand. He says, we haven't been in the Republic under his tenure. We haven't been tested. It was a surprise for Leinster when they came here, the kind of intensity. Hadn't played here as many of those individuals. Rassie has said, we got to win this. That's it. Ireland is a team we have to beat. Our Bok players uncharacteristically have been poking the Irish bear. Eben Etzebeth said a lot. Damien Deland, who doesn't say much, has said a lot. The Irish players are saying nothing, except they've earned the right to say a lot. They're back-to-back World Cup winners. How different do you see, now fitness permitting, Zels, how different do you see that Bok 23 looking? Let's start with the starting 15 to the one that went down 13-8 in Paris in the pool game.
No, not significantly different. I think it'll be, the core of the team will be very much the same. Obviously, Dwayne not being around, Kitsy not being around, those are changes that are forced, but I can't see there being too many sort of optional changes there. I think Edwell is a guy that may feature in a game like this on the wing, and Cheslin and Villiers at the back. I think Jesse's going to play 13 and Lukanya is going to be working his way back to full fitness in the series or to getting onto the field. And then I think we're probably going to have Marnie lining up at fly half and Fuff at 9. So
okay, well, let's stay with your backs.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to get Scotty. What
Cool.
what backline would you start with?
Well, from a box perspective, yeah, I'd stick on message again because there's a lot of consternation about Marnie Libbok, right? We wouldn't be having this conversation if he was 86% off the tee, And I still think that he's the best option at creating, fluidity and heads-up rugby because, inimitably he's got a great inside step, outside step, and has beautiful temperance on the ball where he can put the face ball in, the fade ball, get people running on outside shoulders. So I think for him, he again needs to start to understand what responsibility as a number 10, as we fall over, looks like. Outside of that, listen, you know me, I'm a huge Delende fan. I think Jesse Creel again deserves his outside berth. And again, from a back three perspective, that's all going to be about diffusing pressure and also playing the percentages and playing the field, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's consistency. Villy comes back, yes, he's fit, he's going to play. Cheslin, if he's fit, will play. In terms of how he's come through in the fitness, Kirtley or Van der Merwe, they may give Van der Merwe a go, or they may go back to the experience of Mapimpi. So we have options there.
Yeah.
I think Lukanya Army shorter game time, so you will go with Jesse Creel, just on form. He deserves to be there. And Landy. If he's not right, who do you start at 9? Grant Williams, or do you bring Reinach in?
Sure, it's an interesting call. I don't know. Grant Williams, I think, is a massive impact player. Jet shoes, but maybe you want a Kobus Reinach there.
He's a fucking animal, isn't he?
For the experience, yeah.
He's just for me, he's one of those players that very few teams are able to contain his energy and his physicality. There's a lot of grunt in him, and a lot of rugby craft as well.
And especially in the conditions, you'd have a guy like if Williams is on the bench that can come on in the last 20, can break the game open, and he gives you a back three option in terms of playing on the wing. So let's get back to Libbok, Andre Pollard. I'm a big Andre Pollard man. I've always been, from the time he wasn't picked for the World Cup, I said pick him, get him there, he'll win us the World Cup. He arrived, he kicked like a god, he never missed one. Quarter-final, ice in his veins, semi-final, ice, snow, everything in his veins, and then the final, first one in off the post, never missed again.
Yeah.
That composure. What I don't get, and I've been plotting a lot on social media, is it's still like there's a doubt. Why would you pick Andre Pollard to play against Ireland? Marnie's got to be your guy because we've seen him in the URC. Now, I know within the team's framework, they don't put a great emphasis on, when it comes to Marnie's goal kicking, that it's one of the key areas that they will select him on. They believe, as you said, Scott, he opens up the game so much. Yeah. He does so much that he's worth 2 tries a game. Now, I'd say that's fine. That's worth 10 points. But if you go back to the World Cup, he missed 11 off the tee, and that's 1 point. So it was 6 that he left out there. And the 1 point is that got us through in the quarterfinal, semi-final, and final, where Pollard didn't miss. So if you go back to when he started against Australia, Eddie Jones's Australia was magnificent at Loftus, Marnie Libbok, in a game that opened up in that. Is it a case of you reward him because he's been playing in the URC, he's consistently been playing, Pollard's been playing in the Premiership, they ended a little bit earlier, he may be short of a gallop, but who's the one that's going to trouble the Irish more, having Pollard at 10 or having Marnie Libbok at 10?
Well, I mean, I'm not a very clever guy, but for me, your goal kicker must be able to kick his goals, and that's something that Marnie is not, has proven he's inconsistent. For me, Marnie's biggest strength is his biggest weakness. He's got no memory. So when he makes a big mistake, it doesn't break his confidence because he doesn't remember it. He just keeps playing. But the downside is that when he's off, and it doesn't necessarily fix itself very quickly. So Marnie's attack play, I don't think anybody can question it. His ability to unlock defense is fantastic. Not the most physical defender, and then the goal-kicking issue that comes to the fore. Andre Pollard is a proven winner, and Russie has shown that when it matters, he's going to call Pollard in. So I think who he selects at 10 and at 9, in the situation where Faf wasn't available, is going to show a lot, sort of give a lot of insight into where Russie's going in the next couple of seasons with Tony Brown as the attack coach. how much he's going to stretch his legs and experiment from an attacking point of view with the Boks game plan.
All right, so who do you go with at 10? Do you go with Pollard? Do you go with Libbok?
If it was me and I was saying we're betting money on this game and we have to win it, Pollard is by far the...
Who do you think they're going to go with?
I think they'll go with Marnie.
Scotty?
Yeah, I agree. I think, listen, there's very few players on the international landscape, certainly in pivotal positions like number 10, that just command... Like, the guy is grace under pressure. You know, he's demonstrated that time after time. You know, and I think when you're in clutch positions, you need clutch players. And it's like... And that's where, that is the identification of someone like Pollard, clutch. This is what it takes to win football matches. With Marnie, it's like, this is the athlete that you know, with 5 minutes to go, you're playing catch-up football, could unlock the defence to a high percentage. You know, you go with a tried and tested. And I think it will be a closely fought 2-week series. You know, when it comes to stingy points given and so on, because I think discipline will always be key, and the ability to convert though, because when you hit those penalties, you know, that 3 points is essentially worth 5 on the scoreboard for me. I know it doesn't make sense, but it literally is, because the pressure then gets put on the opposition to make plays, get your run play options involved, get your territory involved, create more pressure. And we've seen time and time again with Ireland is that their ability to absorb pressure and their ability to, you know, conversely put it on you is been one of their great strengths.
If you go back to that 13-8 defeat, take Marnie's goal kicking out of the equation for now. How good a performance did you think he had as a 10? How much did he trouble Ireland as a 10? And would it have been any different if Pollard had been there in terms of the attacking game, but he had kicked his goals? Because they're such vastly different players.
Yeah. I mean, look, Pollard's got a stop to pass, right? And Libbok is just all flash. The guy he's phenomenal on the ball. It's like a Harlem Globetrotter. So it's a completely different player. It's very difficult to say what would have, could have, should have happened. Marnie is definitely worth his weight in gold on attack. You cannot dispute that. The guy's phenomenal playmaker. But you have to factor in the two other parts of the game, which is defense and then the kicking game.
Yeah, but question is, who's better, Pollard or Marnie Libbok, at extrapolating better, you know, value out of their midfield and their outside backs?
Right.
You know, if you're gonna, because the whole ability to keep it simple, stupid. You know, the KISS theory about using your strengths for the reason that they're there is not because that the centre partnership is solid in defence and they're solid in attack. You know, they are dimensional type players, so you've got to utilise that. Who's better at unlocking, you know, the opposition? And I think if you stick to the DNA of what Boks rugby is all about, and it's not the more conservative choice, is that Andre Pollard is a better fit.
Yeah, and for me, Mark, if Monty was at the back, I'd say play Libbok. There's no problem. Anytime you get a penalty, it's 3 points.
The thing for me also, and especially with a series like this, so much emphasis has been put on, you haven't played South Africa in South Africa, and I agree with you, Scott. This is going to be probably a one-score result in that first one, definitely. And it's going to be one place two in the world again. And I think whether they played in Paris, played in Pretoria, or played in Dublin, you're looking at 3 to 7 points between the two, and who takes that. Now, if you look at the way South Africa plays and the confidence they get from building scoreboard pressure, now, any opposition team that comes here and they're 6-3 down, 9-3, 12-3 down, all of a sudden the dynamic changes of the game. And we used to see that with the great Bulls side when Morné Steyn was at 10. They would kick the first 3 kicks they could get, and he'd take a drop goal, and all of a sudden they may have been under the cosh, but they're 12-3 up, and the opposition starts playing a whole different way.
But listen, it's more than that, hey? It's more than that in the sense that the whole game now, you win or lose at the breakdown. Whoever controls the breakdown wins the game. That's how you win rugby matches, right? So if you're on the opposing team and you're a guy that plays to the ball, if you know that every time you concede a penalty, it's 3 points against you, it changes your whole mindset about how you attack the breakdown. And if you know that the guy on the other side there who's going to be kicking the goals is going to miss 40% of his shots, you maybe gamble a bit more.
I look at it like this, and I know there's a simple theory that over the years that I've quickly understood is that you have to look at the opposition and go, who are the major players when it comes to the breakdown and turnover ability, and whether that is Omani and or Josh van der Fleer. What my logic is, you have to make them the tackler. You have to put them in a position. They used to do it with George Smith because he was just the finest, exponent of turning the ball over. But not if he is the tackler.
Totally.
And especially when you bring brute force to that, an energy to that, is that you have to make these kind of potential threats. It takes them right out of the game. Yes, they can tackle and turn over as long as they have the ability to bounce back and challenge to the ball. But invariably, the ruck speed and the follow up now is so in tune is that they just get wiped off the floor. That's what I would look at. And for me, given that the weather is going to be lovely in Pretoria next weekend, Omani's the kind of de facto captain. He is an uncomfortable, gnarly player to play against. I mean, you can see that. But is he the better fit for Pretoria? Fast, open game. And, that's where I think the onus now is for someone like Ryan Baird and Joe McCarthy, who I've seen enough to think these are generational talents. Huge in physicality and stature, work rate, but also have speed in abundance. And I think they're poorly utilized in this kind of, four-man kind of recycling pivot system. I'd rather see them, outside of 10, inside of 12, or on shoulders and that. Really putting a big guy against a much smaller opponent. Because I think that would provide more kind of go-forward momentum that Ireland need. Because when it gets to stalemate, they revert to the pocket, and then they look at the corners. And then they've gone through, 4 phases, 8 phases, and they've wasted a ton of energy. That for me is, that for me is where South Africa really hold the upper hand, I feel. Because their ability from a soak-up perspective and an absorption perspective, they can take these big guys. They can certainly take these big guys.
But that brings me back to, you spoke about the breakdown being so critical. Dwayne Vermeulen is no longer there. He was massive for the best part of a decade for South Africa.
Yeah.
We know what Siya Kolisi does when he puts a green jersey on. He becomes a different animal. He's not.
Well, he's David Banner, isn't he?
Yeah, he's not the same player that he is.
There's a metamorphosis occurs with players like Siya because he's home. Yeah. This is where he belongs, isn't it?
And it's like there may have been criticism of him at Racing. He hadn't played for the best part of 5 months. He should have been out for nearly a year with a knee surgery. And he came back and played Wales in Cardiff and was outstanding for the best part of 50 minutes. And then played the All Blacks a week later and was as good. So I have no doubts that when Siya Kolisi leads that team out, there's a different energy to the Boks. He will be at the party and he will kind of, once again, show why it should never be in doubt if he wants to play. And he's young enough to make it through to the next World Cup if managed properly. He's the guy. Then you've got Peter Steff, non-negotiable. Just incredible performance, 28 tackles in that World Cup final. I mean, folklore. He'll be there forever. 8, with no Jasper Wiese. He's banned at the moment. Dwayne Vermeulen retired. A young Cam Honeycomb who's unavailable because of an injury. There may have been a Bolter selection there. Do you go with Kwagga Smith as your 8? Or do you pick Evan Roos as your 8? Or do you see them both in the mix, but he goes with the more experienced guy and Evan Roos provides impact off the bench because Sia's not going to go beyond 50. That's the kind of way they play it. He empties the engine and then off they go. Where do you see that loose for dynamic?
I would love to see Evan play at the top level so we can get answers on the guy and make decisions about what his future is with the Boks. I think he brings a unique athletic ability to the Bok pack. With edge, sometimes maybe a bit too much. Discipline can be an issue, but the guy's a ferocious athlete. Power speed blenders on the pure speed scale with a bit more grit and guts. So I'd love to see him involved. I think they're going to start Kwagga at 8 and Siya at 6. But for me, I would have Evan at 8 and have Kwagga come off the bench.
We go back to a year ago. We spoke about this, well, maybe more than a year ago.
Yeah.
It was when Wales were here last time. And I think they're talking about Kwagga as an 8. Scotty, you raved about him as an 8. Kind of embarrassed us all year. Said, is he really good enough to play Test rugby?
Yeah.
Scotty said, I like that guy.
Well, no, there's intangibles there you can't really pinpoint, and the fact is that he's one of the best fetchers. And I think, you know, next weekend where there's a lot at stake for both sides. I mean, Kwagga is for me a no doubt selection because, you know, his destructive ability at the ruck, and he just pops up at the most inopportune moments that creates just big moments.
Yeah.
And he deserves that. I agree though. Evan Roos needs game time. We need to see continuity. We need to see consistency. We just want to see him just flourish. Let's see how long those legs can go, because he's got a huge engine, huge appetite for work, but a little bit untested, and the lack of inexperience at big game moments when you're up against the pump and you need to put your body and your head on the line, you know, by getting the turnovers.
But this, with Jasper being out at the moment, Wayne retired, this is the opportunity for Evan to show he's matured.
Exactly.
The door's open, isn't it?
Yeah, he's matured, and there's a certain skill set that you've got to take into Test rugby, and I know that's one of the areas that they wanted him to work on.
Yeah.
His control of the ball, his error rate that was too high, his discipline that wasn't good enough, and discipline meaning not just conceding penalties or a yellow card, but taking a guy off the ball when he shouldn't have. Kind of better decision making.
You know, I tell a word that's underappreciated in Test match rugby is zero defect. Players with very little errors in their game, and that's why Kwagga for me scores highly. You know, because it's just that, you know, he's influential in so many elements of the game, and just like good old style sixes, does all the grunt and all the work that the 32 cameras on the pitch can't pick up, you know?
Yeah. And so, underrated ball carrier as well, Kwagga. That makes meters.
And I mean, explosive. I mean, Seven's background, he just does add a dimension.
Yeah.
And a very untraditional South African type loose forward.
Totally. The reason I'm talking about Roos is, for me...
Yeah, but he's like nobody's hero, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know, that's what I love about him.
He's a folk hero. People here in South Africa love him. But for me, the thing with Roos is one of the biggest, most exciting developments out of the URC this season was Roos, Hanekom, Frankie Horn from the Lions. Those are 3 guys I'd love to see go through the Springbok system in the next couple of years to find out which of them, or maybe all 3 of them, end up at the next World Cup. And so, as much as, yes, we must beat Ireland, and I know Russie's spoken about consistency and not being so centered on these World Cups, I'm also looking ahead and saying, okay, so when do we blood these guys?
Against Portugal, you blood them all against Portugal. They win by 60.
But that's what Ireland and that's what the All Blacks test window looks like, isn't it?
Yeah.
You kind of know what your 26, 28 looks like.
Yeah.
Then you start unloading all the other talent and the combinations and trying to create chemistry and the way that the body language is, you know, in those test matches against Australia away and Argentina.
I think if I've been watching, I watched the series Nick Mallett's 1.5 hours of him dissecting every test match that he was in charge of, and I found it fascinating because he was asked about what would he have done differently going on that tour when they took it to 17 in a row and then lost to England 13-7 in the final one, when they had a very strong midweek side led by Bob Skinstad that was crushing everyone. And he says in hindsight, he never sat down with the senior players and said, to get to the next World Cup, I'm going to have to alternate you. I'm going to have to mix and match you. Some of you can stay at home. Some of you can play in that midweek side. It doesn't mean you're not going to be the starter next season in terms of World Cup year. We've got enough time to prepare. But they were fatigued. They weren't quite as hungry. They thought they could get through that tour on one leg and still win. That's how superior they thought they were. But the high of the then Tri-Nations had to be factored in as well. And he said if he would have, the balance would have been so significantly different, but explained to the players.
Mark, there's 2 key issues. I think with coaches, and what separates the good coaches from the great coaches, is 2 things. Is that radical transparency. You have to provide feedback to your players, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses, where the opportunities are, and you have to have this dialogue. You have to be transparent in the reasons for selection, reasons why you need to work on X, Y, and Z. And the second thing is having thoughtful disagreement. That you can challenge the authority, you know, in a very comfortable way, so there's no blowback. And that's why I think Farrell is one of the great leaders, because there's empathy with the player. Scott Robinson, I dare say, will be massively acute in his relationships with the players, because it's not always blowing smoke up your arse and saying that was a great performance.
Yeah.
However, just because I remember when I thought I was in a strong position as the leading centre for my country, and I remember Graham Henry pulling me on the side, and he said, "Listen, what we're about to discuss is not a criticism, but I'd like you to chase harder the box kick, and I'd like you to be a little bit more combative over the ball in the ruck." And great feedback, because it's said with love and respect. So this is Rassi's challenge, isn't it? It's how does he manage not only the talent that he has, but the potential box office talent that can maybe disrupt the harmonious balance that he's created over the years.
That's what Mallet spoke about, that he said he put too much store in upsetting players and changing. So if Andre Fenter goes out for Bob Skinstead, come on, he's been there for 15 test matches. And he said it was down to his inexperience at the time, 41, 42 years old in his first season as a Springbok coach. But you talk about that communication. I've been watching a lot of videos this week in terms of the Razor Robertson.
Yes.
There's a 3-part series that New Zealand Sky TV did, 20 minutes each, fantastic viewing. If you love rugby and you're a South African, watch this, because they've got an energy about them that we saw with Rassie in 2018 and Jacques Nienhaber. But he speaks about his own playing career, playing for Canterbury, playing for the All Blacks. When he got to the All Blacks, he says Steve Hansen, he felt that Steve Hansen didn't love him. He showed him no love. And he challenged him on it one day. And Steve Hansen realized that it's the way he is. He's a former detective, he's to the point in that he needed to cuddle this guy a bit more while delivering the true fruits to him. And he said it reminded him of his relation with Richie Mo'unga, who he rates as just one of the best, one of the great leaders, one of the great players he's coached. He said the first time he took over Canterbury side, Mo'unga had scored in a club game, he scored 25 points, played brilliantly, but it slipped an easy tackle that the opposition scored. And when he came off the field, he sought out Scott Robertson. And he said, "What did you think of my performance?" And he said, "Well, you gave them 7 points." And he said Mo'unga was crushed. But it took time for him to realize he had to speak to him in a different way. But he had to deliver those hard truths, like you said, with love, with empathy. And we spoke about it previously when he dropped Wyatt Crockett on his last ever game after 200 matches for the Crusaders in the Super Rugby final. And Jaco Paper was the referee. And he said, I called him aside and I said to him, "You're not playing. And you're not playing because we're going to get penalty after penalty against you. This referee is going to pin you." And he said they had a heart-to-heart talk where he had to make a team decision ahead of an emotional decision. They all understood, and he said, and this was the most favorite player in the team. So it's, again, that kind of relationship, and I think Rassie has that, and he's had that for the best part of 6 years in the way he communicates. I know there were issues. There was unhappiness with Pollard before the World Cup. He should never have not gone to the World Cup.
Totally.
And
he came in and he saved everyone's bacon. And I think there will be a great appreciation for him in terms of what he's about, not just as a rugby player, but as a person, as a family man, as a father now. There's bigger things to him than just rugby as well. He's entered a different realm with kind of family man responsibilities. But that's one of Rassie's biggest skills. I think what he's got to balance, and I go back to the Mallet thing, is not wholesale changes, but integration. So it's like I can take a big player out, but let him know he's not out. He's just there for 2 weeks to rest him. I'm not going to just throw 15 new players in against Portugal. They're going to play 7 World Cup winners as well and kind of give these guys the comfort. I mean, Jake used to say it when he brought back Monty and Oosterun. He said, how easy it is to convince a Jan Schalkberger that they can beat New Zealand when Oosterun and Percy Montgomery are sitting next to them in the change room when they've done it in New Zealand. And he said, and that he had 7 of the under-21s. They won the World Championship. Fareed Priya, Ricky January, Schalk.
Jean de
Villiers, Clyde Rathbone, who went on to play for Australia. He said when he put them in with those two guys, the significant difference was just unbelievable of us, what he did and how he galvanized. And I think that's going to be interesting with Rassie and the flow is how does he integrate? And I like what he did in that Welsh test. A lot of World Cup winners in there, respect for Welsh team. It wasn't we sending out young kids to kind of see their growth, giving them every chance to succeed. But also letting the old senior player know there's a youngster who came and he did particularly well next to you. So, if you want to keep that jersey, you got to fight hard for it.
Totally.
He's got to come steal it from you. So, that to me is going to be his biggest challenge, Rassie. Also, the unknown of a Joe Smith, the unknown of a Razor Robertson, and the very much known of a Farrell. And that's why I think Rassie's put so much emphasis on beating Ireland, because we lose to Ireland at home. Forget that we won 2 World Cups. The South African public, those doubts start happening. New Zealand's got a new coach. Australia's got a new coach. And in this country, you lose 4 or 5 tests, people quickly forget.
Yeah, and the margins are going to narrow. I mean, with Razor there now instead of Fozzie, the margins are going to narrow. Those goal kicks are going to matter in time.
And you're only as good as your last good game. And think when that was for the Boks. Okay, three kind of
one-pointers.
1-pointers.
Yeah, I think the Boks would realistically say the game where they really, like, you could have, that first 40 minutes against France was just something unbelievable.
Spectacular.
And then hunting to beat an incredible French side at home. England, they had a winning habit, and they found it in those last 10 minutes when Pollard came on and kind of Peter Steff, harsh words were spoken. And then New Zealand, but for 2 missed kicks, they win it. Yeah. And they go down as one of the greatest ever All Black wins. So those margins are fine.
They're paper thin, aren't they?
Completely. Marnie kicks a couple and Ireland don't win. The whole quarterfinal draw changes. So I think the respect that's there for Ireland is definitely there in terms of the quality of player. And we're going to see that with the team selection. I mean, the tight 5, the only one I would ask you guys there, Bongi to start or Malcolm Marx to start, or does he think maybe Malcolm Marx needs another week of training and Robbie's comes onto the bench? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would start Malcolm again, just until we're sure that he's 100% back to match fitness, and bring Bongi on. But I mean, it doesn't really matter which of those 2 guys you start. They're both world-class hookers.
I think you've got to start well. Boks have got to start well. Can't be chasing it. Cannot be chasing it.
Because you don't want to give that Irish side any confidence.
No.
And also interesting in the sense that, I mean, away from the hooker conversation, after the 2019 World Cup, we had the British and Irish Lions series. Like that was on the radar. So that was something to play for. This is the first time you have the potential for a real hangover, in the sense that the next thing is a long way away. There is a changing of the guard that has to happen, but it does seem like perhaps a lot of that is in the distant horizon. So for Rassie to keep, I think bringing in Tony is a great move, because it will keep everyone on their toes. There are changes that are going to happen. There are evolutions, and everyone's going to be keen to learn it and execute.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a handover, because the big next thing is going to be 26, when the All Blacks come for a 7-match tour, which is going to be akin to a Lions tour.
Yes.
And that's a year out from the World Cup. That's going to be the tester.
Right.
I don't
that's
think...
That's on the horizon.
I think 2 tests against the number 2 side in the world, Ireland, who's beaten us twice in the last 6 years, and they haven't been here since 2016. And then 2 tests at home, Ellis Park and DHL Stadium in Cape Town against the All Blacks.
Beautiful.
Under a new coaching. It actually doesn't get bigger as a home international season for me. And then the challenge of going to Australia, where we've been terrible since 1992. I think it's 5 wins in 30. Where we struggle to beat a Wallaby side, no matter how good or poor they are. I don't think it can allow for a handover, Zels.
No, and also the collective need for World Rugby now, for Australia and New Zealand to get their shit together. Because there is no doubt that when there's a healthy, ferocious competition where I think the right appointments have been made, Joe Smith and Scott Robertson, respectively, with Rassie now back into the seat, it is all going to be about the intelligentsia of selection, execution, the finite detail. And I think that poses well for, the global international collective.
Well, I saw Smith's comments yesterday where, and he's so understated when he fronts the media, and he's certainly not trying to sell the game based on a fast quote. And he said, I had 3 years with Leinster before I took the Irish job. When I walked into the All Blacks, I'd already coached at the Blues. He said, it's the most underprepared I've ever been going into a first test match, because I've had these kids together for 10 days.
Yes.
And then they said to him, there's wholesale changes, there's 14 left from the World Cup squad. And he said, is it? I wouldn't have known, he said, because we just picked on form and we picked on where we feel we want to go in terms of a certain type of player.
Yeah.
And then I saw Robinson and his coaches saying they've torn up the playbooks. I didn't know there was one for the All Blacks at the last World Cup.
Yeah, but isn't that refreshing? Because at least in where they are in their international coaching lives, they've closed the chapter. They've opened a new book. It's a new it's a new page. It's a blank page.
But I also find there's and Jacques was fantastic in what he did operationally as a head coach. But just having Rassie back at every press conference, having him there, he just looks the happiest. I've seen him in terms of being in the Springbok system and being the head honcho there, not being the director of rugby who also has a Springbok coach. And I mean, his comment about Simon Zebo, who he would have coached at Munster, and Zebo came out and said, but we all know that Rassie hates the Irish more than anything else. And if anyone's read all the narrative about Rassie, all he talks about is Munster being his second home, his spiritual home, how much he loved the Irish people. And he said, but then Zebo got on the blower to him and said to him, do you want me to apologize? That's been misrepresented, it's been misinterpreted. And he said, no, let them spice it up.
Let's spice it up.
Well, that's right. I mean, how much of an onus do you think this kind of white noise, the niggle, the rhetoric in the press with Delende and Etzebeth, do you think that has a bearing on it? If there is there's more of a grudge and there's some animosity, or there's a genuine feel that there's an arrogance with Ireland that is misplaced?
I think the Boks players feel that there was an arrogance with Ireland going into the World Cup because they'd never gone beyond a quarter-final. And then with them losing the way they did, on the attack, missing 11 points, O'Keefe blows, held up in the maul, and the way Ireland celebrated, it wasn't like they had won a league game with a bigger picture. It's like they had won the World Cup. And I think that annoyed a lot of the Springbok players, because the first question that Jacques and Sia were asked, can you still win the World Cup? And they hosed themselves. They said, of course we can. And it was just... Some niggle must have happened in that game, because for guys like Eben and Damien to seek out a comment, to actually offer an opinion, to say no, for Eben to say, like, nearly half the side came to him and said, "I'll see you in the final," and he took that as arrogance, as opposed to, you're playing the All Blacks in the quarterfinal, and you saying we'll see you in the final. We play in France. There's no guarantee we'll be in the final. But there's another way of looking at it. It's a compliment. You guys were so good. We're so good. We will see you in the final. But I saw the Irish guys responded that they can't believe that Eben was counting. 1, 2, France. A third one just said it. A fifth one just said it. A ninth one just... Okay, that's 12 of the 23. So Mike Cat has learned, though, from 1995.
Diplomacy.
When he said, when he asked who François Pinault was and who these Boks were, and at Twickenham, we had gone to Rome, beaten Italy as the world champions, went to Twickenham, and that first ball just went straight up. I think he thought 15 Jonah Lombers were chasing him. So I think there's a way of, and you've been there, Scotty, you've played in the biggest games, league, union. There's a relevance to something that gets said that really would itch a team, and there's also just white noise that you laugh about and you dismiss. But there's no doubt that there's not a hell of a lot of love lost between these two teams from a rugby point of view in terms of superiority.
No, because they've dominated the landscape at the apex of world rugby for the last couple of years, 1 and 2. I mean, it doesn't get more delicious, is it?
And you speak to the South African players, then they always like... And when I was with the Boks setup as well, I could never understand how they get up for Wales. They get up for the All Blacks. Australia, they just whatever. And it's like, what? It's Australia. And Ireland back then was the same. You just find, because they're such a technical side, Australia, such a technical side, Ireland, but there's a lot of common ground, simple man alignments between South African players, New Zealand players, and Welsh players. That there's this respect off the field as well. They'll have a beer with one another. They don't necessarily have a beer with those other guys. And I know the guy that does get to the Boks players and the South African players is the Irish captain. And he loves it. And he came to Cape Town and won with Munster, and he came to Pretoria and he won with Munster. So kudos to him for having that attitude. And if he was playing for us, we'd probably love him and say, keep on going.
But that's the key for Ireland, is they've got to roll up their sleeves and be Munster, not Leinster. Leinster lost to the Bulls. Ireland have got to forget all the fancy stuff and the dancing, and they've got to come and smash somebody in the face. That's the only way that they have a chance of beating the Boks. They're not going to outthink the Boks per se. They've got to physically front up. And Omani knows that. A bunch of those Munster guys know that. That's how they were successful.
Who do they miss the most in terms of
Keith Wood.
Brian O'Driscoll?
Well, I don't know. Listen,
With his wheeling Irish accent.
we've talked about Jameson Gibson Park.
Yeah.
You know, Jack Conan is a huge loss because he's another huge work rate carrying threat. But I think for me, Hugo Keenan at the back has always been a calming measure, beautiful under the high ball, but also has, as we know, key, you know, at the back, 15, you're the eyes of the attack and the defence. You know, you understand, you communicate to your decision makers in front of you where the overlaps potentially are, and I think that might be something that will play out next week. You just see, and because I think he's been very underestimated. He obviously made the decision to play in Paris and so on and so forth. But of course, it gives them opportunity to find whether that's, you know, Jordan Lamour.
Yeah.
So I for me that's a key aspect. But I mean, listen, we go back to the grit and the grunt and the bite. It all starts with the pack, doesn't it? And I think they're very evenly matched. I don't see any defect in that Irish pack. I don't. I think there's durability there. There's work rate. There's skill. There's a lot of good touches. So
I think that's where they're missing most. Is who they really need to come back is Andrew Porter and Tyke Furlong. They're both going to be there in body, but those two blokes have been shell-shocked since the World Cup, and both of those guys are going to turn around and get back to being who they are if Ireland are going to have any chance.
And they were shell-shocked when a few Bulls players got stuck into
exactly,
that.
mate.
You know, I haven't seen a Leinster pack at set piece so
Well, it's
comfortably handled
Yeah.
and basically abused
Well,
on the engage.
You know, last week we talked about this kind of accumulative fatigue or whatever, and like Leinster being the best at managing the players' workload and so on. Obviously, they tripped up in the semi-final and so on and so forth. But it is an interesting aspect, isn't it? You know, and I think this just goes to my observation. It's not a common observation that there's a heavy fuel burn with Ireland. You know, it takes a lot to play the system that's been adopted and put in place.
Yeah.
And I think maybe with those two players in question is that they'd like to see a more simplified approach, so they can just they can go back to their cornerstone, scrummaging, hitting rucks, being a pivot player, rather than this kind of helter-skelter, where the fuck am I supposed to be? I've got to be here, got to get in position.
Yeah.
And if you're not there, the whole methodology just collapses.
And there has to be a doubt psychologically that you're the best club team in the world, or definitely in the Northern Hemisphere. You've consistently been the best test team. Gone to New Zealand, as we said, and won a 3-test series, beaten South Africa at home. You don't get beyond the quarterfinal in the biggest game, taking the ball through 37 phases and never looking like scoring.
Yeah.
And just great heroic defence stopped them there. New Zealand had to start well to be in a chance. They were 13-0 up. No one would have, on form, given New Zealand any price against Ireland the way Ireland had been playing. Then you get Leinster losing 3 successive Champion Cup finals and losing 3 successive semi-finals in the URC. So that's a 4-year stretch that you've gone to 7 big games.
It's classic
in terms of finals, and
it's classic
you've been
rope-a-dope,
beaten,
isn't it? It's classic rope-a-dope. Let them punch themselves out. Let them go through 25 phases, because you just want to see them play it out. Because you know the whole essence of that front four is the decision maker, the carrier. Say tag Furlong, for instance, the ability to take the ball up. Safe percentage play. The ability to pop ball, safe percentage play. The ball out of the back, safe percentage play. But when it's done at 1,000,000 miles an hour and you are coming out, you just hit 3 or 4 continuous rucks and you've got to get into position and the thinking has to be symbiotic, it's enormous pressure to put on, certainly front five, just because of the workload that they do in international rugby now. It's hysterical. The amount of work that they have to go through. I mean, it's incredible as well.
And
so I think it's unfair.
And
I really think it's unfair.
There was a very interesting approach in their first 40 minutes from the Bulls in that semi-final, is how they used their kicking game so effectively and just kept on kicking it deep, getting the receive back again, chasing them around. And it wasn't the Bulls playing at helter-skelter pace. They were really dictating the tempo, but using the conditions. And that's why I go back to I fancy a Pollard always, especially at Loftus, and if you want some kind of game breaker, then it's a combination of do you have Marnie or do you have Sasha on the bench? You can't have both of them on the bench, but if you feel there's a cushion enough, and Pollard's always got the ability to play 12, so if you wanted to introduce Marnie into the game in the second half, and you needed your kicker on, there are adjustments that can be made for Pollard to stay on the field. I just want there to be a proper investment in that guy's skill set. He's a World Cup winner twice. He's an under-20 World Cup winner when he was still a schoolboy. I know what Marnie brings as a footballer. He's fantastic. But when I think Marnie Libbok, I think Carlos Spencer. When I think Andre Pollard, I think Dan Carter. In terms of who I would pick in a game. I mean, I'd love watching Carlos Spencer play. Love watching Marnie
but they
Libbok
both
play.
can coexist. They both can coexist now because, like it or not, international rugby is about using all, it is, you exhaust the bench. Everybody gets game time. Nobody gets splinters anymore, do they, by sitting on the bench for, 10, 15 tests and waiting for an injury. Everybody gets exposure. And that's, what that says, you got more tools in the toolbox.
All right.
When a problem comes, that's where you go.
Okay, we're going to chat next week, Tuesday, when the squads are announced for that first test. It's going to be South Africa against Ireland at Loftus Versfeld. Sold out within 30 minutes, that test. It's New Zealand against the All Blacks. It's Wales against Australia. And obviously it's Argentina against France. My goodness, it's just incredible rugger. So make your apologies now. Tell the missus she either gets on board or she's not going to see you for the weekend. But the last question to you, gents. We don't know the 23 yet. We haven't read report. It comes out on Sunday. I have checked Hendrik Cronje's timeline. I mean, he's the go-to man. He's got all the information. And if you give him a follow as well, if you want to know anything about the Boks in terms of what's going on in news. Any bolter in that 23 that you see, a left field selection that we may not be thinking about, does he go 6-2? Does he go 7-1? Does he go 8-0? Cheslin, you're in.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see them load the bomb squad again and go heavy. I mean, I think that's great. I love what they did to New Zealand and at Twickenham, and so I think they've got something there. Teams haven't actually solved that problem yet, so I would love to see them load a heavy bench and maybe just go 1 or 2 backs and see how Ireland copes with that. But in terms of a bolter selection, I don't think anything beyond Evan potentially starting at 8. I don't think so.
No, I can't see them. I think this first test is going to be, let's get one under the belt. Let's try and win it. Let's kill off that thing we haven't beaten Ireland. And then he may integrate and change a bit for that second test in Durban, depending on kind of what happens in the game. But I think this is strongest possible 23 plays, both test matches. They get the series win. They lighten up against Portugal, and it's a whole new ball game when it comes to the Rugby Championship.
They've won the series if they win in Pretoria, though, isn't it? Because they beat Leinster and then they've won the first test. So
well, they can't lose it if they win in Pretoria, put it that way. Eh? And apparently there's not a third one. I forgot about the third one in 2016.
Again, question with my geographic knowledge or lack thereof. Potentially in Durban, is that going to be a more humid, could be wet underfoot? Is that dynamic is always at play where that affects selection and also the ultimate need that Pretoria has to be a W.
What I've found though in the last few years with the New Zealand teams coming here, Australia being the exception, okay, and then during the URC Champions Cup, the northern teams seem to enjoy playing up at altitude far more and struggle when they get to the coast.
Oh, they've been playing on 4G pitches, that's
and it's fast paced, and then they get, especially to a place like Durban, it's like being in Queensland, in Brisbane. The humidity, the balls are difficult.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And also, I think there's a mental switch off. Like the Lions will take this because we're not at altitude. Yeah. I think they're both very different challenges for the Irish team. They're definitely going to enjoy Durban a lot more out in Mhlanga than they are going to enjoy Pretoria. I don't know where they're based. Maybe they base themselves in Mhlanga and then just fly out before the test match. But it's going to be a ripper. 53,000 at the Cathedral, at the home of South African rugby. I've always said Loftus is the spiritual home. Alcatraz, that's Ellis Park. Newlands, we always loved it down here. But Loftus is where this test match should be happening. One place, 2 in the world. It's going to be a ripper. We're going to have lots to chat about next week, guys. It's been fantastic as always. Scotty, thanks for that. Pop the ball to you, take it up. And a lot of people have been asking me what's happened to Ricky Rodriguez. There's no truth to the fact that he's with the immigration authorities. He's actually preparing for the Olympics with the Pumas. So as you see there, the visual on the screen now, you tell me that's not a dead reener for Ricky, and we don't know how the hell he makes it between Argentina, between Cape Town, down to Hammies to play some touch, and then also edits SA Rugby magazine. Thanks, Ricky.
Good chat. Thank you.